there, family. He's the Most High, holy and eternal, King of all kings, the only true, wise, and living God, the Almighty. Well, hello. So coming on today with a part 2 to add on to the previous video we did of revoking the declaration. As you recall, we had actually started a series, looking into the Balfour Declaration and even how our land, the land of Israel, even came to be gifted via a letter of intent by a British Foreign Secretary to another people who claim that they are the people. So we are making a firm repudiation and revocation of this whole legal or illegal instrument, which we had no authority to be made by Britain at all, being on the opposite side almost of the planet. So we know that at the time that the actual declaration was made, the world was coming towards the end of the First World War, essentially also. And that whole region, the Middle East, was then under a stronger Ottoman or Turkish influence. And so also actually constructing an Edomite or a Western nation in that region, would have been seen as a major strategic move due to the actual geographic location, really, of our land, because it is, to all intents and purposes, at the centre, really, of things, at the centre of the earth, almost, in a real sense, geographically. And there are quite major, important strategic assets there also, as we know, Strait of Hormuz, and also the actual Suez Canal, also. And we all recall rehearing Donald Trump's recent statements, really encouraging Western powers to grow a pair and to go and take what they wanted from, to get their oil reserves. And really the whole language, really, of Donald Trump's statement to me was hugely problematic and does very, very much attest to what we've actually been discussing as part of our MAGA series of content for our sister channel, Israel Desperate Report, which, as you recall, we're looking into the whole, we looked really into the history, if you will, of this Make America Great agenda, supposedly, historically. Because it does have very long historical resonance and significance in the earth, to understand that there has been a longer term agenda in Europe around the question, you put it that way, of Yisraelite peoples. So we've come to understand that in 70 AD, a whole nation was exiled from their land and driven into Europe. So this aligns to the actual prophecy that Christ himself gave in Luke 21, where he actually does say, when you see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that her desolation is nigh. He then instructed his people to flee to the mountains. Of course, Africa has always been a mountain for Israel. Christ himself fled, or was taken as a baby, into the mountains or into Africa also, to hide, if you recall, from the anger of Herod. Because if you recall, it was written prophetically, it must be said of Christ, that out of Africa or out of Egypt have I called my son. So Egypt is a land that has major significance for Israel, as well for reasons we've also explained also. So I don't want to get too sidetracked into that today, other than to re-look at this whole issue as to, what has been done to our land and how it was appointed, as Yahuwah actually said in Ezekiel 35, with the joy of all their heart, into the possession of Edom, who had always coveted it and wanted to actually acquire it, perhaps in part due to its strategic location, but also in a sense also because it was also the actual property of the Most High. The Most High had also apportioned for himself. We see this is actually one of the actual major reasons for Yahuwah's displeasure and his, or what is said about actually coming to execute judgment, really, on Mount Seir, which is a name in antiquity used for Edom, the name for ancient homeland, really for having done this. So we know that Daniel does actually foretell, or say that in the latter days, but he actually called them the robbers of thy people. At least that's what the actual angel, those were the terms that the angel actually used to describe the peoples who in the latter days would seek to establish a vision. But he said they wouldn't prevail. So the scriptures in Daniel say that the robbers of thy people shall establish a vision, or shall seek to establish a vision that they are the chosen people, but they wouldn't ultimately prevail. So, I mean, a letter of intent, family. It reminds me almost of the arrogance of Pope Alexander, who passed a papal bull called Inter Caetera. That means, amongst other things, when he happened to be consigning the property of our people into the property and possession of Portugal and Spain. Because Inter Caetera essentially was a papal bull that was passed to resolve a dispute between Spain and Portugal, who had almost turned murderous in their wars against each other to acquire and apportion lands in the New World. So they turned to the Pope to actually resolve the dispute, and the Pope actually resolved it by just apportioning some random line of longitude on a map, literally like that. And he consigned everything on the right of that line to Portugal, and everything on the left of that line to Spain, which is the reason why to this day, every country on the left of that line speaks Spanish, and every country on the right of that line speaks Portuguese to the present day. So we see really how history really does will have long-term implications for everything. What's the reason why we are where we are today? Why we see the sorts of things we see today? Well, you've only to look back at our history. And this is the reason why we have actually been saying as a channel, and have actually released many prophetic words. In fact, I've been actually prophetically releasing words since about, probably almost about 10 years or so ago, when we were actually doing open-air evangelism, really around these words to actually say that a major shift was coming, and that some preparation needed to be made, really, in order to avert certain catastrophes, things from actually transpiring and being set into train. But unfortunately, we weren't heeded, unfortunately. Partly, I guess, I don't perhaps look the part, possibly also the wrong colour for some peoples as well. However, the actual chosen people of the book, of this book, are my people, and are people that you had in your lands, people who Yahuwah had actually designated should actually be handled with delicacy and with respect. At least what he says in Jeremiah 50. Who've been treated anything but. And this is part of the reason for Yahuwah's displeasure and coming back in judgment. Because while he says he did actually allow our people to fall into the hands of Edom for our disobedience in not always fully turning to him, he then goes on to say that he's very sore displeased, so using almost triple negatives, with the heathen and with Edom for what he's done specifically to his people. Because while he was a little bit displeased with us, he said that Edom very much helped forward the affliction. So I mean, they went way, way, way beyond the bounds of what Yahuwah actually allowed or did actually say was reasonable for them to do. But anyway. So why do we talk about some of the things that we talk about on this channel? And why did we even do the MAGA series of content? Because I'm aware that some people took that quite offensively. And it just got, well, perhaps those on the wrong side of the history. It got certain backs up. And the overall message of what I was actually trying to communicate and convey, again, was never heard. Well, we've actually begun discussing, really, how we've just come to the end of a major cycle of history in the Earth. And the reinitiation of a new cycle or phase of history now in the Earth. And we know that history is very resonant, very, very important. As we've come to understand, there's an adage that says, those who refuse to learn the lessons of history are doomed to repeat its mistakes. And it was with that in mind that we actually raised that channel of that stream of content, that series of content, the MAGA series, as part of our Israel Diaspora Report channel of content, to actually look at what had transpired in the past 2,000 years. Well, even though we know it, really, but at high level, to be quite analytic, to look back at it and reflect. And this is very, very important because we, well, I know I certainly, for one, have no intention of repeating that cycle of history or committing my descendants to do that. And Yahuwah also will not suffer that also to extend or to continue. Because we are, as we have now said, at the end of the calamity, for want of a better term. It's what Ezekiel 35 calls it. Verse 5. We're now at the time when our calamity now has an end. So Yahuwah really isn't best pleased with many of the things that have transpired. And many entreaties have fallen on deaf ears. And now are, I guess, in some ways, some things are now sealed. Because we have seen very, very clearly that in 2020, we understand there was a reinitiation of many of the covenants, especially of those who are on the wrong side of this history, who seeing that various things, who had actually removed various things to bring in a new order of things, panicked, and instead of trying to actually consider what was actually transpiring, tried to reinitiate various things to remain in control, so they perceived. But they cannot be reinstated because they were actually totally removed, as they will see. So there are possibly other prophetic words also I also do need to put out as well around all of this, because I'm noting that there are, well, a lot of things going on spiritually, a spiritual battle and wars being fought over the head, over the possessions of the chosen specifically. And this is one of the things that's actually going to get Edom removed, because no one has yet managed to do some of the things that they're actually seeking to do spiritually, and ever yet prevailed. And this is why the reason they were given in 1990, I'm aware they were given the word tekel, and I've also given a word Perez also to add to that, because they literally are fulfilling the prophecy that Belshazzar did actually, they're doing exactly the same thing. In Belshazzar's case, he was answered within 3 hours. He was removed, his throne and kingdom were removed within 3 hours, and he was dead. He was no more. For his violation of some of the same things that Edom is doing, as if it's nothing. So I may come on to talk more extensively about that in a separate podcast. But today I really want to focus on the issue of our land, because we are making a firm repudiation, well, of everything, but chiefly of what has actually been done to our land, and are revoking that Balfour illegal declaration, or illegal letter of intent, which had no right to be given by Britain of all nations, who are even on the opposite side of the planet. I mean, what does our land have to do even with Britain? Nothing at all. So we know that because of the actual war was actually ongoing at the time, and Britain was on the winning side of it, therefore the actual territories, they assumed ownership over certain territories as a result of that. And just adds to the strategy overall around Yasharel, because of course we were also driven out of our lands by Edom, essentially, in 70 AD. Do you see how unusual that was? This was perhaps a technique in antiquity, but not so much really in such modern times, to actually drive a whole nation really out of their lands. And we saw, even by looking at the scriptures in Zechariah, what the prophet Zechariah had said, that to understand that loss of our lands had led to Israel becoming little more than a flock of slaughter. Because that whole population that were driven out, this would have been millions of people driven into Europe. And then we see, really, till it came down until Spain and Portugal were the last bastions or nations in which there were major numbers of our peoples residing by the late 15th century. Them all having been kettled in there, essentially. So the rest of the peoples literally decimated really, in that 2,000-year period. So we came to see that really by that time, the late 15th century, they had been living in Spain and Portugal about 1,700 or so years, all told, because there were even some of our people who also lived there also before the actual driving out of our ancestors from our land also. They lived there to trade. And we see that on the day of Pentecost, of course, when people came from all over the earth just for the actual feast from disparate lands where they actually had been living in that time. So if you want to understand more about that history, I've kind of tried to summarize some quite large subjects in quite little time. If you want to know more about that history, then do actually go on to this channel and look at those videos. They're the MAGA series, they're called. 1492, the past, present. To really see what history does tell us. And as the adages say, those who actually refuse to learn its lessons are doomed if they're not careful to repeat its mistakes. So yes, so we see that our lands were gifted to another people who say that they are the people, but who the Bible actually refutes are not the people. Even the Revelator, John, in Revelations 2:9, 3:9, says those that say they are the Jews, because of course we know that those who are the Jews don't say they are the Jews. So I don't call myself a Jew particularly. I don't know any other Yasharites that do call themselves Jews particularly, even though that's what we are. But even as to coming on to look at the history of our land also. And well, just what has really transpired there. So we understand it's been under, well, roughly more than 40 different regimes or governments or orders have tried to run or control it just in the last 2,000 years alone. Then, of course, we remember the debacle with the Crusades and all the bloodshed, really, that ensued around that. Now, although medieval records didn't really exist at that time, so it's difficult to actually know the actual true death toll. We know it's in the order of millions of peoples, both combatants, non-combatants, so civilians also swept up in the violence across Christians, Muslims, and Jews, really. And the actual rough records, the actual historical records, say between about 1 to 9 million, potentially, people actually died during the Crusades overall. So at that time we know that Europe was wholly Catholic. This would have been in the actual 11th century. So in November 1095, Pope Urbain I, at a Council of Clermont in France, because of course we know the papacy did reside in France for a time after it left Asia. So of course we have given the history how the church, or the early church, actually pursued essentially the first churches. So our forefathers established the first 7 churches in Asia, if you recall. They weren't able to do so in Jerusalem because, of course, Jerusalem was lost. But they established the first churches in Asia as well. And we'll explain how the actual replacement church, because the Catholic Church, she's the first Catholic Church, yes, the first major global Gentile church, or if you like, the first Gentile church. But she isn't the original church. So we see she actually pursued the first churches into Asia as well. And then when that was completed, and when they were removed, they then actually set up their actual capital in France for a time. So they actually made a call for Christians to reconquer Jerusalem from the Muslims with promises of spiritual reward. So the earth was, and then as now, had this divide between the Christian and Muslim, this tension, this conflict. And of course, conquering our land was also seen to be more of a major strategic move to actually break that stronghold, if you will. And also to, I guess, to safeguard various strategic interests, really, in that region also at that time. And we all recall, of course, the speech of Donald Trump around the actual recent conflict, the blockade at Suez, of course, Strait of Hormuz, which I actually found the language hugely problematic, to be honest, because it does hark back to more traditional narratives and handlings of complete disrespect and sort of looking down, if you will, on other peoples whose interests and needs aren't deemed to be as important or in need of as much respect as other peoples and nations. And this really, moving forward, will be hugely problematic and really won't be endured. So a whole reason for looking at some of the actual subject matters we do really as a channel is not only to really incite or to encourage debate around some of these things, but to see also what we can do to move forward in a more positive, more constructive way. Because we've explained that we did actually essentially come to the end or the completion of a cycle of history and are now embarked on the reinitiation of a new cycle and phase of history. So we have an opportunity, if we are brave, if we're courageous, to seize the moment and agree how to do things in a better, perhaps more upgraded or better way, if we can receive it. Otherwise, making no decision may just result in a return to a repetition of the previous cycle of history. And I don't think anyone consciously, especially a Yashurite consciously, would want to have any kind of repetition of that history. Because we've seen the actual nature of what it actually meant for Yashurites. Because while many of us are aware of the transatlantic slave trade, not many are aware that this trade essentially occurred twice. There was also an outward trade from Europe, mainly Spain, Portugal, going back towards the west coast of Africa, and also to the New World also. And that period did also coincide with the exiling of the Jacobites, or the Jacobean, those in the Jacobean revolt as well, including Yashurite King James also, as in the actual translator of the actual King James Version of the Bible, who was also a Yashurite, who was sent into exile also at that time, who was a Yashurite king, essentially, in this country, in England. So this is part of a hidden history that has been very largely concealed. I mean, you can find it if you dig, but it isn't commonly reported or known. So as we know, Yahuwah is really calling for the return, recovery of his people. At this time to now return to him. we know that, and we've looked at many scriptures that do actually tell us of Yahuwah's intention to return to recover his people and to redeem them. And we have been exploring, as part of our Nation of Israel channel stream of content, the whole question of how we even navigate our path to return to Yahuwah successfully. So we do, actually, with that in mind, actually regard Wednesday as a fast day for our people. So we do encourage you, wherever you are in the world, if you're a Yashraelite, to also join us on a day of fasting on that day as well. So it's no food from 12 a.m. to 3 p.m. on a Wednesday is our global fast. So do join us for that. Fasting is an important discipline for us as Christians, and it's part really of our navigating our path to return, actually building in that discipline to our daily lives and routines as we seek to draw closer to Yahuwah. So it's followed up by a Bible study also on a Wednesday from 7 p.m. So do tune into that also. I should also say I'm having some disruptions currently with my tech, so I'm hoping I won't be hampered in actually uploading my Bible studies or Sabbath sessions, but there may be some disruption at the moment because I don't have a laptop to record sessions formally on. So I'm resorting to having to use my phone for everything at the moment. But anyway, Yahuwah, as we say, is extending an invitation now to his people to now return to him. And in concluding this video, I'm going to include a short reading from 2nd Esdras, which speaks of the lament of Jerusalem and having lost us, its children, and also, with that in view, I should also have published a podcast I was actually been working on about Pride Land as well. So for those of you who aren't aware, Pride Land is a pop-up festival for Pride that's being held this June, as of now, in Israel. And you'll never guess where they decided to actually hold this festival, family. See if you can guess. Near the ancient site of Sodom, of course, as in Sodom and Gomorrah. I'm not quite sure who thought this was a good idea. A bit of a case, I think, of social media pop-ups. Gone a little bit too far, I think. But I think we're all now quite used to this constituency's attempts to shock and awe us. So, I mean, that apart, we also see how Israel generally has committed, well, the best part of its real estate, namely Tel Aviv, to being a year-round location for this agenda. The thing I would say to them is, I think the clock might be ticking, because it's a covenanted land. Even Israel, who are the actual people of the book, that land is their own inheritance and heritage, didn't succeed to manage to, well, do that, or to worship